English teachers, what topic on a write about anything essay made you lose hope in humanity?
I teach literature at a college and mostly deal with freshmen and sophomores. For our free writing unit, one of the assignments asked the students to write any original story based on your favorite fictional genre. So, one of my students wanted to do horror. I said great. That's also a favorite of mine. Go nuts. Eventually, the assignments are turned in and I'm grading them at home. I get to the kid with the horror story and it's about a serial killer who stalks women. Okay, whatever. Nothing I haven't seen before. But then the story goes into long, excruciating detail about the next victim this killer plans on stalking, raping, murdering, a petite blonde in her early 30s who teaches English. And it just so happens I'm a petite blonde in her early 30s who, well yeah. I didn't report it or anything since it was a creative exercise. I didn't grade him unfairly, either. But I seriously couldn't look that kid in the eye ever again.
Here's one I can actually answer. I was teaching an IELTS test prep class to high school-aged students in China. One of my students is planning on being a nutritionist, and when I gave her a topic about what she would change if she could be the president for a day, she said that she would imprison everyone who was over a certain BMI until they were thin, and if they were repeat offenders they should spend life in prison for wasting public resources and making healthcare more expensive for everyone else. Not an English teacher. Just a mother reading over her 10th grader son's essay 2 weeks ago. He had written something to the effect of, "Heaps of people have heaps of hobbies." So we had a conversation about using more academic language and employing a wider range of vocabulary. I come back 10 minutes later and he'd used the thesaurus function in Word, so it now read, "Piles of people have mountains of hobbies." Just wow.
Not a teacher. In high school, we got told to write a short horror story. Someone googled short horror story, printed it out, and handed it in. He literally just took a screenshot and printed it, so you could see the URL and what he was watching on YouTube. Spoiler, he didn't pass.
I'm impressed he reached the level of print screen. To this day, I see posts where people captured the screen with their phones.
In high school, we had a history essay to write about JFK and one of my classmates wrote the entire essay by naming him Jean-François Kennedy. Yes, it was in France. My teacher was so astonished by it, he asked her why she didn't wrote the abbreviation JFK instead of guessing the name, and she answered that she actually thought his name was Jean-François Kennedy.
Who doesn't know his real name is John Fortnite Kennedy?
Killed by Lennon Hockey Oswald, too. So sad. Teacher here. Once had a female student submit an assessment that included the phrase "now," as a male journalist. Didn't bother reading the rest.
A classmate did that, except with American and turn of the millennium, we were Australian, and it was like 5 years ago.
You know how some people get in a pedantic argument about how the new millennium started in 2001 instead of 2000? Well, they are all just arbitrary numbers anyway, so I've decreed that the new millennium started in 2013. Everybody else just started counting at the wrong time.
This guy wrote me a paper about how swamp ass ruined his marriage, describing it initially as an unexpected rash. He wrote at length about how this rash caused his wife to stop having sex with him and refuse him any intimacy. After some time, he and his wife got a divorce, and he promptly blames the rash for it. It isn't much later in the paper, at this point a good 6 pages long, that he details his struggles with proper hygiene due to cheap toilet paper causing this rash. So, because this guy couldn't wipe his ass properly, he lost his wife, his kids, and his sanity, to the point where he decided to come tell me about it. My second place is probably the guy who wrote about how he got AIDS. Edit, Jesus. My top-rated comment is now about how one guy failed to wipe his ass to a clinical degree. My second highest is about how I passed on sex to go to the zoo. Reddit really is a roller coaster.
English tutor here. I had a student in high school who was really struggling with the writing prompts I was giving him. He was studying hybrid genres in school and how to write a hybrid genre short story. So I basically gave him a long list of genres, told him to pick any two he wanted, and combine them to write a story. He didn't get it. He emailed me asking for clarification, like which topic do I choose here? And I told him he could be as creative as he liked. Pick horror and science fiction, pick mystery and crime, pick romance and mystery, whatever strikes your fancy. I literally could not have given him an easier prompt. Then he asks me to give him some examples of hybrid genre stories, so he has an idea of what to write. So I emailed him a list of famous hybrid genre books, for instance The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, Gun with occasional music by Jonathan Lethem, Harry Potter, etc. This kid basically latched onto Harry Potter and rewrote the sorting ceremony from Philosopher's Stone, word for word. There was no orientation, no info about his main characters, who were coincidentally also called Harry, Ron, and Hermione, no complication, no climax, no resolution. It was literally just an incomplete retelling of the sorting hat ceremony from the first book. Not only did this kid fail to think of a single creative story idea, he plagiarized one of the most famous books of all time, and was daft enough to think I wouldn't notice. It really made me despair.
4th grade. I was teaching the kids how to write short stories. Kid wrote a story about going to a new school for the first day and being abused by teachers. It was awful. Turns out this kid was being abused by his dad and thought it was normal behavior for adults to act that way. Absolutely heartbreaking.
It wasn't write about anything, it was more like create a story. My student, 9 years old, female, wrote about two best friends. They were at the mall when one of them got kidnapped by a villain, who put her in a suitcase and took her to London. Everyone searched for her and she was found dead. The villain had murdered her. The police arrested and imprisoned him for 10 years and then killed him. The girl's best friend was really sad and killed herself, and then they lived happy ever after. She is 9. And wrote about kidnap, murder, police violence and suicide, and romanticized suicide.
I assigned a write about anything poem assignment. They could choose any style of poetry based off of any of our mentor texts. They simply had to incorporate their interests or themselves into the poem's style. One of my students, 11 years old, female, shared, for the very first time, her experience of being raped by her grandfather. I talked to the student, called the parents, the guidance counselor, Child Protective Services, and the police. The grandfather is in prison now. Fuck bad people. Edit. Thanks for silver, gold, and platinum, and thanks for the responses. This poem haunted me from the moment I read it. I was a student teacher when I gave and read this assignment, and I had a moment of wow, can I handle this? Thankfully, I came to the conclusion that I could handle this because I realized that any one of my potential future students might also need someone else to confide in and lean on in times of trouble. I'll always be there for my kids. Edit 2. Thank you all for your overwhelming support and kind words. I appreciate all of the love shown here in this thread. Please, hug your children, tell them you love them, and remind them that there is no shame in being a victim. Their voice and their story matters. Please, please, please make yourself available to them. Let them know that they can share anything with you, no matter how scary or personal. Be their champions.
A student at my university apparently stumbled upon a centuries-old rule. During one of his exams, he requested cakes and ale from the proctors, as was his right. They pored over the books, and, hidden away, realized he was right. They gave him a cream bun and a can of beer. The student was later given a fine for being improperly dressed, as he hadn't brought his hat and sword to the exam, as he broke another very old, but never rescinded rule. A Catholic high school in my hometown asked for students to write about what they would do if there were no laws or lack of morals. This was inspired by the purge, which had been discussed in ethics class. 12 students were suspended indefinitely, 2 or 3 ended up expelled, the others returned eventually, for what they wrote, ranging from date rape to human trafficking to mass shootings, even though the assignment made it more than obvious that it was a fictional assignment, and by relating it to the purge pretty much goaded students into matching the level of lawlessness. Made national news. There were articles by psychologists for days. They even mentioned the Reddit Ask a Rapist thread and the psychologist's response to not create a feedback forum. Not a single article even came close to suggesting that if you give 17 to 19-year-olds an opening to go against good taste, that most of them would do so for shits and giggles. 2 students, the date rape one and the mass shooting one, did not find another school and did not graduate, or at least had to redo their last year. Not a teacher. Senior year of high school we all had to write a 20-page research paper on a subject of our choosing and then present it to our class. I got mine done junior year because I was slightly advanced with my classes. Ended up with an A on the paper, C on my presentation. So of course, I helped my friends out. Other classmates found out and started offering to pay me to write this. Got quite a good lot of income that year. One girl contacts me a day before the essay is due. She has 4 very rough pages done, with only the intro being solidified. I know her from my volleyball team. She's nice, but a complete stoner. I say I'll try, and charge her a lot for 16 pages in one night. She chose to write about how the government's banning of weed is to control and subdue the populace, which is partly true, but all of her sources are from backdoor websites and conspiracy theorists. Since somehow the source list got approved by the teacher, she was in the lowest level English class. I couldn't change anything and had to go off the crazy sources she had. It ended up being an essay about how the government bans weed, even though George Washington was a stoner. He wasn't. He just harvested hemp while maintaining a secret drug experiment program where they test different drugs in humans to create super weapons. Surely an interesting experiment for me. Surprisingly, the essay also received an A, although ended up being a B because she submitted it late. I did get it to her in time. Check out our newest videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.